details in the killing of Fort Valley State student and Atlanta native Anitra Gunn. Her boyfriend, Demarcus Little, has been found guilty of murder.
It only took the jury 3 hours to hand down this verdict following 7 days of testimony. Shortly after the verdict and impact statements from the victim's family, a judge sentenced Little to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the 2020 killing. Investigators say Little choked Gunn to death with his bare hands and left her body in the trunk of a car.
February 14th, 2020, 2:17 in the morning. A Waffle House in Georgia becomes the last place Anitra Gunn will ever be seen alive. Security cameras capture everything, but they can't record the words that would kill her. 22 years old, a senior at Fort Valley State University, Anitra had her whole life ahead of her. She was smart, she was loved, and on this Valentine's Day night, she made one terrible mistake. She laughed. When her boyfriend confessed something to her, something dark, something that should have terrified her, Anitra laughed. She thought he was joking. He wasn't. Hours later, she would be strangled to death in the woods of Crawford County. So what did Demarcus Little tell Anitra Gunn that night? What confession made her laugh and then made him kill her? Tonight we're going to find out. Before we continue, we want to acknowledge the profound loss felt by everyone who knew and loved Anitra Gunn. To her family, her parents, her siblings, her grandparents, our hearts are with you. No family should ever have to endure what you've been through. To her friends at Fort Valley State University, her professors who saw her potential, her neighbors who watched her grow up, we know that Anitra was more than just a victim in a crime story. She was a daughter, a friend, a student with dreams that will never be fulfilled. We tell her story today not for shock value, but to honor her memory, and to shine a light on the warning signs that might save someone else's life. Anitra deserved better. She deserved to graduate, to build the career she was working toward, to live the full life that was stolen from her. We won't forget that. And to everyone watching right now, whether you're here in Georgia, across the United States, or anywhere else in the world, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. This story has touched people everywhere, and we want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell us your location. Are you watching from Atlanta? Maybe you're tuning in from California, New York, or even overseas. Let's see how far Anitra's story reaches today. Let's talk about who Anitra Gunn really was. 22 years old, a senior at Fort Valley State University in Georgia. She wasn't just getting by, she was succeeding. Anitra was the kind of student professors remembered, the kind of person who had plans. She was studying to build a future for herself. While other students were still figuring things out, Anitra knew where she was headed. She had goals, she had ambition, and she was just months away from graduation. Her friends described her as someone who lit up a room, not in some cliché way, but genuinely. She was the person people wanted to be around. Smart, funny, caring, the kind of young woman any parent would be proud to call their daughter. Anitra had everything going for her. A bright future, people who loved her, and the determination to make something of herself. But here's the thing about predators. They don't target the weak. They target the strong. They look for women who have something to lose, something they can control. And Anitra, she had a secret that made her vulnerable to exactly the wrong person. His name was Demarcus Little. On paper, he looked like a catch. 24 years old, an Army sergeant with a steady job and a clean uniform. The kind of guy parents might approve of when their daughter brings him home. But that's the thing about abusers. They're experts at looking normal. Demarcus wasn't some obvious monster. He didn't have face tattoos or a criminal record that screamed danger. He was charming when he needed to be. He knew how to present himself. That's what made him so deadly. The red flags started small, like they always do. He wanted to know where Anitra was going, who she was with, what time she'd be back. At first, it probably felt like he cared, like he was protective. But protective and controlling, they're not the same thing. Friends started noticing changes in Anitra. She became more careful about her words, more anxious about her phone. The confident young woman who used to speak her mind, started second-guessing herself. And then came February. Early February 2020, just 2 weeks before Valentine's Day, Demarcus showed Anitra exactly who he really was. He slashed her tires, all 4 of them. Then he smashed her car windows with something heavy, probably his fist. This wasn't a moment of rage. This was calculated destruction. This was a message. Anitra called the police. There are reports, official documentation of what he did to her property. Black and white proof that Demarcus Little was dangerous. Those police reports from weeks earlier, they should have been a warning. February 14th, 2020. Valentine's Day. For most couples, this would be a day of flowers, dinner, maybe a movie. A day to celebrate love. For Anitra Gunn, it would be the last day of her life. But she didn't know that when she woke up that morning. She had no idea that in just 6 hours, she would be dead. She got dressed. She probably checked her phone, maybe talked to friends, went about her normal Saturday routine. College students don't usually have big Valentine's Day plans anyway, especially when money's tight and you're focused on graduating. At some point that evening, Demarcus contacted her. We don't know exactly what he said to get her to meet him. Maybe he apologized for the tire-slashing incident. Maybe he promised to make things right. What we do know is that Anitra agreed to see him. In 6 hours, Anitra would be dead. But first, she would make one fatal mistake. She would trust him one last time. 2:17 in the morning, a Waffle House in Georgia. The kind of place that stays open all night, serving coffee and hash browns to shift workers, college students, and people who have nowhere else to go. This is where Anitra Gunn and Demarcus Little had their final conversation. Security cameras captured them sitting across from each other in a booth. Just another late-night couple having what looked like a normal conversation. If you walked by their table, you might not have thought anything was wrong, but something was very wrong. Witnesses later told police they remembered seeing them together. A young black woman and a man in his 20s, talking quietly over coffee. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary to the staff working that night. But here's what we need to understand about Demarcus Little's mental state at this point. He had already shown his capacity for violence. The slashed tires, the broken windows. Those weren't accidents. Those were calculated acts of control. He had crossed a line 2 weeks earlier, and now he was sitting across from the woman who had called the police on him. Think about that for a second. This man had destroyed her property, terrorized her, and yet here she was, meeting with him at 2 in the morning on Valentine's Day. Why would she do that? Because abusers are manipulators. They know exactly what to say to make you doubt yourself, to make you think maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe he's changed. Maybe this time will be different. Demarcus knew which buttons to push. He had probably apologized, promised it would never happen again, made her feel like she was overreacting. So there they sat, in a booth at Waffle House, while he worked on getting her guard down, getting her to trust him, getting her alone. Here's my question for you watching right now. Would you have noticed the warning signs? If you had been there that night, would anything have seemed off to you? Because the truth is, most of us wouldn't have seen it coming. That's what makes predators so dangerous. So what did Demarcus Little tell Anitra Gunn that night? We'll never know his exact words. But based on what happened next, and what investigators would later piece together, we can reconstruct the moment that sealed her fate. At some point during their conversation, Demarcus said something that should have terrified her. Something dark. Something violent. Maybe he told her what he was planning to do to her. Maybe he described exactly how he was going to hurt her. And Anitra, she laughed. Picture this for a second. You're sitting across from someone who has already shown they can be violent. Someone who destroyed your property just 2 weeks ago. And they say something horrible to you. Your brain doesn't want to believe it's real. Your mind tries to protect you by convincing you it must be a joke. A sick joke maybe, but still a joke. So you laugh. Not because it's funny, but because the alternative, accepting that this person actually means it, is too terrifying to process. Anitra laughed because she couldn't believe someone she had once trusted could say something so awful and mean it. She thought he was joking. He wasn't. And in that moment, when she laughed at his confession, Something changed in Demarcus Little's eyes. Something shifted. The mask came off completely. Because abusers hate being dismissed. They hate being laughed at. They hate losing control. Investigators would later find proof of what happened next. Physical evidence that would tell the story of Anitra's final hours. Evidence that would show this wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of rage. This was planned. They left the Waffle House together sometime after 2:30 in the morning. Security cameras show them walking to the parking lot. Anitra probably still thought this was just another fight they'd work through. Another argument that would blow over by morning. She had no idea she would never see another sunrise. What happened in the next few hours would be reconstructed through forensic evidence, witness statements, and the cold, hard facts that investigators pieced together. Demarcus Little's fingerprints were found on Anitra's car. Not just on the outside. Inside, too. That tells us he was in her vehicle. That tells us he had control. Think about the logistics of what happened next. Anitra's body was found days later in a wooded area of Crawford County. That's not where they started. That's not where the Waffle House was located. Someone had to drive her there. Someone had to choose that location. Someone had to make sure it was isolated enough that no one would hear her scream. The tire tracks found near where her body was discovered. They matched a damaged vehicle connected to Demarcus Little. He had literally left his signature at the crime scene. But here's what's truly chilling. This wasn't random. The location where Anitra was found, it was carefully chosen, remote, hidden. The kind of place you'd only know about if you had scouted it beforehand, which means this wasn't something that happened in the heat of the moment. This was premeditated murder. What forensic experts discovered about Anitra's final moments would shock even experienced detectives. When Anitra Gunn didn't come home on February 15th, her family knew something was wrong. This wasn't like her. Anitra was responsible. She checked in. She didn't just disappear without telling anyone where she was going. Her family filed a missing person report, and that's when law enforcement got involved. But here's the thing about missing person cases. The first 48 hours are everything. After that, the chances of finding someone alive drop dramatically. The search began immediately. Crawford County Sheriff's deputies, Georgia State Police, volunteers from the community, everyone who could help started looking for a 22-year-old college student who had vanished on Valentine's Day. They searched wooded areas, abandoned buildings, anywhere someone might hide a body, because by this point, that's what they were really looking for. Everyone hoped they'd find Anitra alive. But the circumstances weren't pointing in that direction. Days passed. Her family held on to hope, putting up flyers, posting on social media, begging anyone with information to come forward. Her mother couldn't sleep. Her father couldn't eat. This was their baby girl, their smart, ambitious daughter, who was supposed to graduate in a few months. And then, on February 19th, 5 days after she disappeared, a search team found her. Crawford County, a wooded area off a rural road, the kind of place most people would never have reason to go. Anitra Gunn was dead. The call to her parents is something no family should ever receive. The moment when hope dies and grief takes over completely, when you realize your daughter, who just wanted to get her degree and build a life for herself, will never walk through your front door again. Her mother collapsed. Her father, he couldn't even speak, because this wasn't just a death. This wasn't an accident or an illness or some random tragedy. Someone had murdered their daughter. Someone had looked into her eyes and decided to take everything away from her. Every dream, every goal, every moment she would never get to experience. 22 years old. She should have been worried about finals, about job interviews, about what to wear to graduation. Instead, her family was planning a funeral. When Dr. Andrew Koopmeiners, the medical examiner, began his investigation, Anitra's body told a story that no family should ever have to hear. But it's a story that needed to be told, because the evidence would prove exactly what happened in those final moments, and it would prove that this was no accident. Anitra Gunn died from manual strangulation. Let me explain what that means. This wasn't strangulation with a rope or a cord or some object. This was done with hands or an arm pressed around her neck. Someone looked into her eyes while they squeezed the life out of her. The medical examiner found bruising and abrasions on her neck, her face, and her hips. These weren't minor injuries. These were the marks of violence, the marks of a struggle. Inside her lip, there was bruising. Her face showed discoloration. These are signs that she was choked with tremendous force. But here's what tells us about Anitra's character. Even in her final moments, she fought back. There were crescent-shaped marks on her body that could have been made by her own fingernails. She clawed at her attacker. She tried to get away. This young woman refused to give up without a fight. The medical examiner also found linear abrasions on her thighs and her back. These injuries happened after she was already dead. She was dragged across rough ground, probably to the location where her body was eventually found. Think about that for a second. Someone killed her in one place, then dragged her body to another location to hide what they had done. That level of planning, that level of calculation, it tells us this wasn't a crime of passion. But there was one piece of evidence that would prove premeditation beyond any doubt. Detectives had a body. They had a crime scene. Now they needed to build a case that would hold up in court. The fingerprint evidence was damning. Demarcus Little's prints were found on Anitra's car, both inside and outside the vehicle. This placed him with her car on the night she disappeared. But fingerprints can be explained away. Maybe he had been in her car before. Maybe those prints were from a different day. So investigators kept looking. The tire tracks found near where Anitra's body was discovered, they matched a damaged vehicle connected to Demarcus Little. Not similar tracks, not maybe could-be tracks. A perfect match. He had literally driven to the dump site and left his signature in the mud. Then there were the police reports from early February. The slashed tires, the broken windows. Official documentation showing that Demarcus Little had a pattern of violence toward Anitra Gunn. This wasn't some random crime. This wasn't a stranger attack. This was domestic violence that escalated to murder. Detectives started connecting the dots. The Waffle House security footage, showing them together on Valentine's night. The fingerprints on her car. The tire tracks at the crime scene. The history of abuse. It was like a puzzle, and every piece pointed to the same person. Demarcus Little had stalked her, manipulated her into meeting him, murdered her, and then tried to cover it up by hiding her body in the woods. But here's where cases get complicated, because having evidence and proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, those are two different things. Little's defense team had a different story to tell. When Demarcus Little's trial began, prosecutors laid out their case piece by piece. They showed the jury the security footage from the Waffle House. They presented the fingerprint evidence. They brought in the medical examiner to explain exactly how Anitra died. The prosecution painted a picture of a controlling, violent man who couldn't accept that his victim had called the police on him. A man who lured her to a meeting under false pretenses, murdered her, and then tried to hide the evidence. But what happened in that courtroom went beyond just evidence and testimony, because Demarcus Little himself became part of the story. His behavior during the trial was revealing. This was a man who sat in court while prosecutors described in detail how he had strangled a 22-year-old college student to death. And at one point, he claimed that Anitra was his soulmate. His soulmate. Think about that for a second. You strangle someone to death with your bare hands, dump their body in the woods, and then sit in court calling them your soulmate. That's not love. That's not passion. That's not even rage. That's something much more disturbing. That's the mindset of someone who believes they own another person. Someone who thinks that if they can't have you, no one can. This is the psychology of an abuser taken to its most extreme conclusion. See, abusers don't really love their victims. They love the control they have over them. They love the power. They love being able to make someone afraid, being able to make someone change their behavior just by walking into a room. And when that control starts slipping, when the victim fights back, calls the police, tries to get away, that's when abusers become most dangerous. Because in their twisted minds, they're not the problem. The victim is the problem. The victim made them do it. The victim forced their hand. Demarcus Little admitted to the jury that he had slashed Anitra's tires and broken her windows. But even then, even while confessing to those acts of violence, he tried to make it sound like it was her fault. He blamed her for his own mental state. He made himself the victim of his own crimes. That's textbook abuser behavior. Take responsibility for nothing. Blame the victim for everything. But the prosecution had one more card to play, because beyond all the physical evidence, beyond all the psychological analysis, they had something that abusers can never explain away. They had the truth. After hearing all the evidence, after seeing the crime scene photos, after listening to testimony about Anitra's final moments, the jury had to make a decision. They deliberated for hours, 12 people, trying to determine the exact level of guilt for someone who had clearly committed murder. Because here's where the law gets complicated. There are different types of murder charges, and each one carries different penalties. The prosecution had charged Demarcus Little with both malice murder and felony murder. Let me explain the difference. Malice murder means you planned to kill someone. You thought about it, you made a conscious decision, and you carried it out with the specific intent to end their life. Felony murder means someone died while you were committing another felony. Even if you didn't specifically plan to kill them, if someone dies during the commission of a serious crime, you can be charged with felony murder. The jury found Demarcus Little guilty of felony murder and aggravated assault. But they found him not guilty of malice murder. What does that mean? It means the jury believed he killed Anitra Gunn while committing another crime, probably kidnapping or assault. But they weren't convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that he specifically planned to murder her when the night began. Some people might see that as a victory for the defense. But here's the thing about felony murder in Georgia. The penalty is exactly the same. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Demarcus Little will never breathe free air again. He will never have another Valentine's Day dinner. He will never see another sunrise that isn't filtered through prison bars. He took 22 years from Anitra Gunn. The state of Georgia took the rest of his life from him. But the case didn't end there. Remember, criminals don't usually act alone when it comes to covering up murders. Someone else was charged in connection with Anitra's death. Javon Abron, Little's friend, was charged with concealing the death and making false statements to police. This means Abron knew what had happened to Anitra, and instead of calling the police, instead of helping her family find answers, he helped cover up a murder. He lied to investigators. He helped hide the truth while Anitra's family was desperately searching for their daughter. That makes him part of this tragedy too. Anitra Gunn's story isn't an isolated incident. Every 9 seconds in the United States, a woman is assaulted or beaten by an intimate partner. Every day, more than 3 women are murdered by their husbands or boyfriends. These aren't just statistics. These are daughters, sisters, mothers, students like Anitra who had their whole lives ahead of them. And here's what we need to understand. The warning signs were all there. Those February incidents, the slashed tires, the broken windows, that wasn't random vandalism. That was escalation. Domestic violence experts will tell you that property destruction is a predictor of future violence against the person. When an abuser destroys your belongings, they're showing you what they want to do to you. Demarcus Little was sending Anitra a message when he destroyed her car. He was telling her, I can get to you whenever I want. I can ruin anything that matters to you. And if you don't do what I say, you're next. The controlling behavior, the need to know where she was at all times, the manipulation to get her to meet him even after he had terrorized her. These are all classic signs of an abuser who is escalating toward violence. But here's the most chilling part of this entire case. Remember the confession that made Anitra laugh at the Waffle House? The words that she thought were a sick joke? Based on the evidence, based on how she died, based on what the medical examiner found, the confession that made Anitra laugh contained the exact method he would use to kill her. He told her he was going to strangle her. And she laughed because she couldn't believe someone she had once trusted could say something so horrible and mean it. She thought he was joking. He was confessing. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in Anitra's situation, if someone is controlling you, threatening you, destroying your property, making you afraid, please know that you're not alone. Anitra Gunn was supposed to graduate in May 2020. She should have worn her cap and gown, walked across that stage, and started the next chapter of her life. Instead, her cap and gown hang in her childhood bedroom, a reminder of all the tomorrows that Demarcus Little stole from her. Don't let her death be in vain. If you see the warning signs, speak up. If you're in danger, reach out, because every life is worth saving. Stay safe, and thank you for watching. Until next time.